Hello and welcome to How to See Spiritually, a series with me, Mark Vernon, on intuition and the eye of the soul. If you like the films, please do share them and be in touch and make comments. In this episode, I want to look at wonder, the role of wonder in spirituality, because I think wonder is often the sort of beginning point for where people try to then engage with life at more depth. They know there's a surface to life, they feel the material side of life, they've done some measuring, some empirical testing or read about that. But wonder suggests that there's more. It's this material world is opening onto a spiritual element, a spiritual dimension. And so it invites us to engage more deeply with reality. It's an ancient notion. Aristotle remarked that in wonder all philosophy begins and in wonder all philosophy ends. He meant that a whole lot goes on in the middle between the initial sense of wonder and the final, deeper, more sophisticated, subtle sense of wonder that the engagement with life has unfolded for you. That's the sort of spiritual journey. But I thought the wonder is really important because modern science delivers us wonder in copious quantities. It's always been there, right back from the earliest days of modern science. The first pioneers in the field were often driven by a very profound sense of the spirituality of nature. They didn't just gaze into the heavens and see wonders there before their eyes. They studied nature. They drew beautiful drawings of nature that don't just show us the anatomical details, but communicate something of the astonishing sights that they saw. This was a participation in the natural world, a sense of vital sharing in the heavens that drove the early scientists. So wonder was there right from the beginning. You see it in the great scientists as well of the 20th century, the great innovators. Perhaps the most famous of them all was Albert Einstein, who along with his discoveries in relativity and in fact in quantum physics as well, developed quite a good line in how wonder had driven him not only to embark upon his scientific investigations, but that they kept speaking to him as the science developed, as he unfolded it. Here's just one comment of his, which is quite well known. He says, "Try and penetrate with our limited means the secrets of nature, and you'll find that behind all the discernible laws and connections, there remains something subtle, intangible, and inexplicable. Veneration for this force," that's the wonder bit, the veneration for this force, "beyond anything that we can comprehend, is my religion. To that extent, I am in fact religious." So wonder began the scientific quest for figures like Einstein, and it developed. He developed this sense not just of what's going on, but this veneration for a force that he could grasp to some degree, and yet always was more than he could grasp, always led him the next step. And I think this is really important to think about in relation to science, because sometimes science is seen to be the opposite of religion or seen to be the opposite of spirituality. I really don't think that it is at all. You know this the minute you watch a science program on the television or read a popular science book. These books speak to us, these films show and communicate so much to us, and because they trade in wonder all the time. The presenters are flown to beautiful parts of the world or shown against the backdrop of pictures from the Hubble Space Telescope. It's speaking to our aesthetic sense, to our sense of wonder. Music's commissioned to raise the soul, even as a bit of science is explained. So this is always, I think, been part and parcel of science, not opposed to it. Perhaps we've realised that now at the beginning of the 21st century, where we've been through this phase of what's sometimes called the new atheism, the very strident, militant, atheistic kind of science. Richard Dawkins is the best known example. As a word, it was a bit of an experiment to see whether you could read about science in very beautiful ways. People like Dawkins are great writers, but at the same time be told that this is just emptiness, this is just purposelessness, this is just a sort of mechanical, material world in which we live. And as it were, we're not allowed to not so much indulge, but to develop and follow the sense of wonder that the science begins to open up. It led to a lot of confusion, I think, that on the one hand, we were told that nature strives to reproduce, and that it's driven through the evolutionary periods, and at the same time we were told that it's purposeless, it doesn't have direction, it's not about anything, it's just chance and chaos. Those two sides don't actually stick together. Quite what's going on in nature is hard to say, and yet there is this powerful sense of pulse and wanting to engage with it, which is our wonder and picking up on that. So I think that's why we've moved on from this period of very dogmatic materialism, and now popular scientists and other writers are beginning to engage with the implicit, with what I would call the spiritual once again. You see it perhaps most successfully, most keenly in nature writing, which has become very popular. The greatest nature writers, they don't just tell you about a way a forest works, they give you a sense of being there. They communicate, they channel something of the life of the forest. And in fact, they also say that the greatest scientists will immerse themselves in nature. They'll participate in it in all sorts of ways, aesthetically, imaginatively, really trying to open themselves onto what they're studying. And from that springs some of their best ideas, that they then do the scientific work, they do the experiments, they follow the empirical procedures, there's no doubt about that. But there's a much more entwined and deep connection, I think, between a spiritual wonder and the more empirical wandering about how this is working. We're beginning to get a sense of that once again. So in terms of the things like science and religion, I actually think it's a bit of a mistake to think of science as one world and religion as another world, speaking different languages and somehow trying to get them to cross-fertilise or to understand one or another or to resolve their paradoxes. There's a much more continuous sense of being that we're engaged with here. On one level is the material world, the tangible, the measurable, but it's connected to that which is more alive and vital, soulful, and then ultimately is connected to the venerable forces, the spirit that seems to be behind and implicit, embedded in all things. That's what wonder really invites us to follow, I think. It doesn't just leave us as a kind of couch potato, a bit open-mouthed at the spectacular sight we've seen. The next step is to try and pick up on that sense and allow your wonder to wander into, to investigate in a more profound and subtle sense, so that the world really opens up in 3 dimensions and doesn't just leave you floundering, rather infantilized as sometimes this science can leave us with. We feel it belongs to to the experts. They're the ones that really know, and we just get the kind of tidbits. Actually, I think a bit of science and then going on a walk and understanding just a little bit more about the intricacies of the plants, or going on a walk and understanding a little bit more about the vastness of the night sky. This is not an emptying experience. This is a profoundly deepening experience. To go back to Aristotle again, I think what led him to remark that in wonder philosophy begins and in wonder philosophy ends, is that he was elated really by the sense that his mind, his reason, his perception of things somehow fitted into the cosmos around him. There was a resonance, a harmony, which he felt that led to his investigations, led to his discoveries, but also enabled him to feel embedded, taking part in the natural world. He was there, as it were, called to investigate, called to pursue his interests, and at the same time it gave him a profound sense of belonging and connection. My sense is that science and wonder's beginning to lead us back in that direction once more. It's a launch pad. It can take us somewhere. Perhaps just one more sort of example of that, a much more sort of fun and playful example, but nonetheless one that speaks very powerfully, actually, I think is the world of sci-fi. The fictions which are written around scientific intimations, the growing scientific sense of things. Sci-fi often works in mythological ways. It's not just random speculations about the future. It's as much comment on the present. using what might happen as science develops, as technology develops. And that's so interesting because it's saying that science isn't just about, as it were, the accumulation of knowledge. It's about a deepening perception of the way that the world is now. And a sci-fi story, a good sci-fi story, opens your sense of what it is to be alive now, as much as invites you to think about what the future can be like. I think that's a key part of why sci-fi appeals. It's psychological, you might say, as much as technological. It's wonder developing and deepening. So, think about wonder, think about science. The next time you read a bit of science, the next time you look up into the night sky, allow yourself really to experience that wonder. It has the first step. Goodness me, what's this all about? But then there's a second step. Wonder quickly leads into understanding, feeling, appreciating more deeply, more nuanced, more subtle. It's a launch pad into a spiritual dimension, a soulful dimension of things. And so my sense is that wonder and science must be a key part of how to see spiritually, the theme for this particular talk in the series.